Karoline Leavitt, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the spending bill that just passed. North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis, as you know, a Republican, voted against it. His concern was cuts to Medicaid, not because of the work requirements. His concern is the 680,000 people who would lose eligibility, and that our rural communities could lose their hospitals, which are major employers in these communities. So we're looking at a hit to people's health care and to local economies. How is the administration making up for this?
Well, look, I think it's deeply unfortunate that Senator Tillis did choose to vote against this legislation, because this bill is the largest tax cut for working and middle-class families in North Carolina that has ever passed through Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C. In fact, according to an analysis by the Council of Economic Advisors, this piece of legislation is going to raise wages for the great people of North Carolina by nearly $6,400 every single year. If you also look at some of the other tax provisions, such as no tax on overtime, effectively ending taxes on Social Security for seniors in North Carolina, this bill is going to lead to more money in the people of North Carolina's pockets. That's why President Trump strongly supported it, and every other Republican on Capitol Hill helped pass it, and it has now been signed into law. It's a great bill for North Carolina and the rest of the country.
But how is the administration going to make up for the hit to the local economies? I mean, tax cuts don't save hospitals, and these hospitals are at risk of closing.
I think the administration rejects that there will be a hit, as you pointed out, to local economies. As for rural hospitals, the administration wants to protect those good-paying jobs. There were final provisions that were changed in the bill to ensure that those local hospitals are protected and are getting the resources that they need from the federal government. And the president wants to continue to create jobs in North Carolina and in states across the country, not just in the healthcare sector, but also in every sector, our energy sector, our manufacturing sector. That's why you've seen trillions of dollars in investments that have poured into this country, including in the state of North Carolina, because of the president's efforts to bring good-paying jobs back to North Carolina and to the rest of the country. And I think just largely moving away from the legislation, but looking at the great economic formula that this president has put into action. If you look at the massive deregulatory campaign, in addition to the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed, the largest tax cuts in history, if you also look at what the president has done to revive America's energy industry, all of this has led to the tackling of inflation, the defeat of the inflation crisis that was created by the previous Biden administration, as well as lowering the cost of living in North Carolina and across the country. That was the president's goal. It was a signature campaign promise, and in just 6 months, he has already accomplished it.
I want to talk about a program that actually President Trump had created in his first term and has since cut. This is a FEMA program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. 2 weeks ago, flooding from Chantal devastated our area. In Hillsborough, a local community, people had to boil their water for days, in part because something called the River Pump Station flooded. The town has tried to move that station out of a floodplain using funding from FEMA's BRIC program, but it was one of many projects in our state that depended on that money, about $200 million statewide. That program got canceled in April. Why get rid of something that he started? And where is that money now?
Well, look, what I will tell you with respect to FEMA is what the president envisions for this federal agency that has unfortunately for many decades been bogged down by bureaucracy. The president wants to make FEMA more efficient, and he wants state and local governments, so your governor and your state and local elected officials, to lead and make decisions during times of crises. The federal government and the president will be there to provide the resources, but ultimately state and local officials need to make these decisions on the ground. They are closest to the people in your state. But the president has done a great deal for North Carolina. If you recall, it was actually the very first domestic trip he took when he returned to office was to your state in the months following the devastating impact of Hurricane Helene. And he wants to ensure that FEMA provides the resources, but ultimately state and local officials are there on the ground with backup from the federal government, but that they on the ground are leading the charge.
So where does that $200 $200 million in projects funding. Where does it go since the program was canceled? These community leaders are needing that money in order to be able to do that pump station relocation, for example. So how do they access that money if the program has been pulled?
Look, as you know, the Department of Homeland Security oversees FEMA, and I know Secretary Noem has heeded the president's call when it comes to dishing out those resources, but making sure that state and local governments are actually implementing those resources on the ground.
All right. Let's talk about President Trump's efforts to cut NIH research grants. You know, Raleigh was just named #1 in the country for business, also #1 in the country for college graduates. And it has a lot to do with the research-focused industry in our area. You probably know there's something called the Research Triangle Park. I mean, it's literally in the name, Research Triangle Park here in Raleigh-Durham. So this industry really depends on those grants. Why cut them?
Well, I don't think perhaps you understood that what the research industry was doing was actually spending about 80% of the money they were receiving on research grants on administrative costs, and only 20% of that money was actually going towards the real research and the science. So the Trump administration has actually redesignated the formula for research grants coming from the National Institute of Health to ensure that entities that are receiving this money from the federal government are actually putting it towards science and research and finding solutions and answers for the American people, not towards administrative costs or to pay off people who are becoming very wealthy at the taxpayers' expense. We want that money going towards actual findings, research, and development. And so there weren't cuts. There was just a redistribution of where that money is going. So that's in the best interest of taxpayers who are funding these grants.
Let me give you an example. We recently reported on a doctor. Her name is Charity Oyedeji. She lost $750,000 in NIH funding for sickle cell research. What do you say to her and to others like her? I mean, she would argue that what she is doing is very much based in science and not just trying to make herself wealthy.
Again, I'm unfamiliar with that doctor or her case. I would have to look into it before commenting on it. But what I can tell you is this administration, of course, backs science and research and development. We want the United States to lead in innovation when it comes to science and research. But we also want the research industry, if you will, to be good stewards of the American taxpayer dollar.
Let's leave on this as we wrap this up. Let's bring it back to the spending bill. I am getting quite a lot of emails and calls from viewers who are concerned about the growing deficit with the spending bill. What do you say to them?
What I'll tell you is that this was the most fiscally conservative big piece of legislation that has moved through Capitol Hill ever. And the president is focused on tackling our nation's crippling debt. That is the problem of politicians of the past by bringing in massive revenue through his effective use of tariffs, while also cutting taxes, putting more money back into the people's pockets. And he is working with Congress to find other ways to hopefully one day get to a truly balanced budget. We just sent a rescissions package to Capitol Hill. That means clawing back some of the wasteful spending of the previous administration. And in addition to that, again, the president is focused on bringing in massive revenue in our country through the form of tariffs, which will result in billions and billions of dollars to help pay down our debt. The president ultimately is a businessman. He understands he wants to run this country like a business, unlike so many politicians and presidents from both sides of the aisle in the past. And he is focused on getting America's fiscal house in order while also cutting taxes, getting rid of regulation, and allowing the American people and businesses to boom.
Karoline, Leavitt, thank you.
Thank you.